If you listen to the show, you already know that we cannot exist without our sponsors. They are the ones who make things happen behind the scenes. So let's acknowledge Fuji Sports. We've been working with these guys for a while now, not only as far as this podcast is concerned, but also at the RŌL Academy. We've had their gear. I personally use their gis. What a phenomenal product.
Yeah, I mean, jiu-jitsu, judo, MMA, tape, bags, anything you need for your jiu-jitsu journey, you can find at fujisports.com.
Let's talk RŌL TV. There's so much content on there. It's ridiculous at this point. But I think what is even more intriguing, as time went on during the project, we've been recording most of the events that were taking place here at RŌL Academy. At this point, I mean, we have guys like Chris Haueter, Armin Fati, Rafael Lovato Sr., and Pete the Greek. I mean, there are so many different events that we've kind of recorded it. Don't you think that's amazing? I mean, points of reflection and kind of going back for all the students to see what really happened and refresh their memory.
Yeah, I think it's great, you know, being able to go back and look at all these high-level practitioners, Octavio Cudo, like one of the names you didn't mention. And I mean, just these guys that have been doing this for so long come in, teach these amazing seminars and workshops, and it's all recorded and there for you to watch.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you want to get additional savings on all this, type in code ROL Radio at the coupon and get additional 30% off of your membership.
Nice. Go to rolacademy.tv.
What's up, everyone, and welcome back. If you haven't already, please hit the like, share, subscribe, download, listen, and whatever other button there is, and leave a review wherever you do listen. This ensures that we can continue bringing you the great guests and amazing content that you've come to expect. Today's guest discusses the connections formed through jiu-jitsu, the misconceptions that jiu-jitsu is for everyone, individuality in jiu-jitsu, and more. Here's the ROL Radio with Krav Maga black belt, a Chris Haueter black belt, and co-owner head instructor at Rough Hands Jiu-Jitsu in Louisville, Kentucky, Jesse Walker.
Welcome to RŌL Radio.
We are live. Another great conversations ahead of us. Jesse, thank you for being here. And as I understand, we have a mutual friend.
Yeah, I appreciate the invite, first of all. Yes, we do have a mutual friend. The old bastard himself, right?
The old bastard himself. I just had him a couple episodes ago. What a great conversation with him.
Yeah.
How long you guys known each other, by the way?
You know what? We actually have not known each other too terribly long. We met for the first time at the BJJ Mental Models Camp up in Lansing, and I think that was back in March or April. But he's one of those guys, and maybe you had the same experience that, you know, upon our first meeting, we became fast friends.
You know, let me ask you right off the bat, how is that even possible? That once in a while we stumble upon, in a random circumstances, upon somebody who literally makes an impact on us in such a way where at least in my circumstance, I feel like I know that person for so long and it's just been brief.
Right.
And two, their impact in such a short amount of time has been so tremendous that I feel like, what the hell I've been doing this entire time?
Right.
How is that even possible?
Yeah, you know, I don't know that I've got a great answer. I mean, certainly for Mike and I, we shared a lot of the same. You know, we all love jiu-jitsu. We all train jiu-jitsu. You know, all of us have that in common. But there was something in particular things that felt so aligned with kind of my approach and my thinking and my way of operating in the world, that it just kind of thoughtlessly, you just get really tight really fast.
Yeah, there has to feel good in a sense, that alignment between two different individuals where that connection, that bond is so strong.
Without a doubt. And I mean, I think that's I think that's particularly powerful as an adult, right? I mean, even I think we're really lucky in our sport in that the aspects of the physical closeness, the intimacy of it, I think makes it a lot easier to make friends. But in general, as adults, we have a tough time meeting new people and making friends. So when we find somebody that's so aligned with us in so many ways, it really is refreshing.
Yeah, and you mentioned the intimate approach to jiu-jitsu, which it is so true. And somebody told me a while back, actually on this podcast, is that we put our lives in the other person's hands, which could be one of the main components why we've developed such a strong bonds between each other. And this is not only male specific, but it's just the bond as a community, as a team, as a cohesive group who, you know, do this unusual thing. Do you think that happens in any other sport? Like, I don't know, CrossFit guys, do they develop that kind of that kind of bond? And nothing against CrossFit. I know I pissed off a lot of people out there right now, but like, does that happen in other activities?
No, I mean, I think so. I think there's two aspects of it. I think that physicality and that trust that you talked about, it's something I talk about with my students a lot, and it's a little bit of a trick question, right? Sometimes I'll ask, what makes jiu-jitsu work? And then silence across the room. And I'm like, it's the tap. The tap is the only thing that makes jiu-jitsu work, because otherwise you're just fighting, right? But this activity that we do is so reliant on that trust, that thing that can make it stop when we've gone too far. And you have to trust the tap, or you can't ever enjoy jiu-jitsu. Having to put your hands, put your safety in the hands of other people does really tend to build bonds up very quickly. And I don't think, I think grappling sports is probably pretty common in, maybe even all combat sports. I also think, you hear guys in the military talking about it, combat sports. I think when people go through an intense ordeal, right? I think that tends to tighten the bonds between people for sure.
And that's hard, right? I'm just referring to the tap, especially at the beginning.
Absolutely, it is. Even knowing when to tap and feeling some resistance, like I think I can still get out of this, or I don't want to submit, I don't want to lose. That whole concept of losing makes it really hard in the beginning.
As I was educating myself about your life and about what you do, I caught a quote here, and if I'm butchering this, I apologize, but it really strikes very close to what we just started talking about. While intensity is an important component of jiu-jitsu, part of training the sport is about learning when to use your intensity. I mean, that's pretty deep thinking in that sense. It's not how hard we go, but when we go hard is essentially would that be a correct phrase?
Yeah.
Correct understanding this?
Yeah, I think that's right. If you approach this sport at 100% intensity all the time, you're not going to last very long. Whether that be to injury, or you just get burnt out, or this, that, and the other thing. Being able to ramp up and ramp down intensity is incredibly important. And an efficient use of energy, an efficient use of your body is what makes jiu-jitsu so special.
So why is it so difficult for us, especially at the very beginning? Let's create this picture of first month, first 3 months, even a first year of training. Mm-hmm. Why are we such a meatheads? And I said this many times on this podcast. I was such a meathead when I was starting.
Yeah,
I was terrible training partner.
Yeah,
but why are we such a meatheads? Like why do we gravitate to this extremely physical part of this engagement, and then deeper we go into this, not only will we lay off of the physicality, but then we become really much more mentally stimulating.
Yeah, I think, I don't know. Maybe I have a few answers for that. So, number one, I think people have a certain expectation coming into a school, a gym, whatever you want to call it. Maybe they've seen some YouTube videos, or, they've heard Joe Rogan, like, you can go 100% of the time, all that nonsense. So they have this expectation coming in, and they know that it's a combat sport. So, they're coming in ready for war. And it's a really tough hump for some people to get over, to understand, like, that's not exactly what we're doing here. And yes, it is a combat sport. But these are your teammates. This is your crew. You're not coming in here for battle every night. And there's some places that kind of are like that. So maybe they've come from another school, but and then there's, I think, this aspect of this concept of losing. I try to beat that out of my people as quickly as I can. That this whole idea of losing or winning when we're on the training floor just needs to vanish as quickly as we can make that happen, because that makes your journey harder, in my opinion.
Right on that level, because in a very simple mind, for somebody who's starting jiu-jitsu, is like, I mean, guys are listening to this right now, and they, maybe perhaps again is their first month or first 3 months, and they're like, well, wait a minute, you asking me to fight this guy, or this guy's trying to choke me? How are we not fighting?
Yeah.
What's going on here? Like, this doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. So it's a little bit of a paradox, right? We are, in some ways, we are in this kind of combative activity, but ultimately, I think most of us are there to learn. And if you're coming in there and beating everybody and, doing whatever, at that point, it just kind of becomes performance and the learning has stopped. But if you are serious about learning requires you to stay in a zone of failure. Failure is where the learning is. If you're not failing, you are not learning. And a lot of people equate failure with losing or doing poorly, or, it has this negative connotation. But when you understand, like, hey, I'm here to be challenged. I'm here to fail. I just need to sit in it and be with it and try to learn from it. Those people that are able to do that, take off like a rocket in terms of, how quickly they get it and start to get good.
So how does competition fit in all of this? Because it feels like it's the opposite side of the spectrum.
Yeah.
Because first you tell me that we are not fighting. Then you tell me that I have to fail in order to learn. But then if I go to competition, I should not be failing. I should be fighting.
Right.
Right. So it's like, it's almost the oxymoron here. Like what is this craziness going on here? Like, I'm just trying to do jiu-jitsu here, and Joe Rogan told me I can smash people all the time. So
right. Yeah. Competition's different. Competition is not a learning environment. It is a performance environment. So you have to spend that time in that training environment, the learning environment, to be able to perform. And again, that intensity that we talked about earlier, that may change in when we're getting ready for competition. But ultimately, everything that we're doing on the training floor is working towards, in theory, you being able to perform under pressure and in a combative environment.
I found this analogy in some sense fitting very well into this. I'm curious what you think about this, where somebody said, look at professional sports. Football, basketball, doesn't matter which one it is. They don't play games every single day. They practice, they drill, they put themselves in specific scenarios to troubleshoot and figure things out, and then they go to battle, then they really play the game. putting combination of the things that they have learned to test and really with the objective of winning the game. And then after the game is finished, they go back to the drawing board and see what went right, what went wrong, and let's get back to those drills. Let's do the boring stuff in order for us to perform. How come we don't apply that as often in jiu-jitsu, in a sense, where I often at least think that it's like one or the other versus being smarter about this? How come we are not educating ourselves about jiu-jitsu, in a sense, versus doing, being these meatheads, in a sense?
Yeah. So, I would say that, well, I use that very similar analogy a lot of times with my students, and this may be getting ahead of ourselves in the conversation, but for the vast majority of the time when we are holding a class, at 6 o'clock, 6:30 class where people are going to, I am not holding the last 30 minutes of class for rolling. Because to me, at least that gets a lot closer to performance, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mention to people frequently, it's like, all right, so you are interested in football, you're wanting to be a better quarterback. Do you do that by playing the entire game of football? And the answer is like, no, of course not. At a young age, maybe that's just learning to pass the ball back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's, finding a particular target and hitting it. And now the target is moving. And now maybe we've got defenders with arms in the face. So it's something that you have to build up to. And that along the way, there's going to be a lot of failure, right? The defenders are going to bat the ball away, but if we try to, as soon as I learn to pass the ball back and forth between me and dad, and then go try to play an entire football game, I'm going to get creamed, right? It doesn't make any sense. But that's the way a lot of us train and practice jiu-jitsu. And, once you're at the end of class in a lot of places and you're rolling and you're like, this shit that coach just showed me doesn't work. I can't make it work. And it's like, well, no kidding.
It doesn't work.
Jiu-jitsu doesn't work.
Wait.
Yeah. So I really try to help people understand what the kind of pathwise progression is to skill acquisition, right? Don't expect to be able to finish a Kimura against a live resisting opponent the first day right after you saw it taught in class, right? It is a process. So I start adding in kind of mini games to help them kind of work with that stepwise process.
What do you mean by minigame?
So it may be something that we do in class. It may be something that I help them build a plan. We do have a number of open mats during the week where people could come in. And I said, look, if you're wanting to get better at, let's just stick with the Kimura, right? Maybe your first day when you're when you're in a role and kind of in a more alive environment, maybe your first game, your first challenge to yourself is see how many times you can recognize an opportunity to get a Kimura grip. Great. Now, if you're feeling good about that, now let's start just trying to get the Kimura grip. Are you being successful at that? And just this stepwise progression of finally being able to see it, grab it, and finish it. And achieving that kind of skill acquisition goal. And then once you've done that with the white belts, now go try it with the blue belts and the purple belts and the brown belts and the black belts. That's how skill acquisition happens. Everything else is just kind of, people do get skill acquisition, but a lot of times it's through brute force.
But it's boring, isn't it?
Maybe.
Playing devil's advocate,
Yeah.
I really try challenging you on everything you say, but these are the answers that we get, or a lot of instructors get out there,
Yeah.
right? Like, I don't want to do that boring stuff. Why would you ask me to repeat this 50 times? Like,
Yeah, well, I mean, it shouldn't be boring. That I feel like that's something that I have to. I don't necessarily know that I get that from students a lot, but that's certainly something that's going on in my head a lot as a coach. And I'm like, oh man, this is so boring. I'm probably losing everybody here. And then I just have to remember to myself, like, no, you know, if I had a coach here holding mitts and I had some boxing gloves on, they could just work the jab with me for 45 minutes and I would be perfectly happy. And if it's something you truly love, that's fine. It's fine.
And this is one of the most fascinating things about jiu-jitsu, at least in my mind, is that if we look at other sports or martial arts or physical contact engagements, like boxing, for example, where literally the amount of strikes you can throw is so limited that, you know, you have jab, cross, hook, uppercut. There's really not, really the art comes in the distance control and combinations that you throw. I mean,
right.
that's really what boxing is all about.
That's right.
Now, in jiu-jitsu is almost the opposite side, where we have thousands, if not tens of thousands of options, and we have trying to narrow this down to a little bit more specific approach, where we are mastering individual path of approach, if you will.
Yeah.
It does that create this more challenging environment with overstimulation and confusion and just overwhelming amount of information that some of the, especially at the very beginning, students are experiencing?
Yeah, it certainly can. And I mean, I think that's really been, so I came from that kind of striking world, that stand-up world, where you only had 5 punches.
Yeah.
But when you really start to understand it, you either have 1 punch or an infinite number of punches, depending on how you look at it. We've taken a few little discrete examples and put labels on them, but punching is punching. I have spent a lot of time and listening and studying with a lot of other great thinkers in jiu-jitsu, trying to boil a lot of that down, you know, and especially when I start talking about joint locks, right? You know, we take the arm, for instance, and if we're gentlemen and ignore the wrist for a moment, there's really only 2 ways to joint lock an arm. We can hyperextend the elbow, or we can over-rotate the shoulder. That's it, 2.
Mm-hmm.
How many different armbar variations do we have named? Zillions.
Well, and
right?
And this is exactly what I'm referring to, because, and it's not only that we have zillions of names, there could be multiple names for the same thing, because people are trying to be creative now.
Right.
So it's like the overwhelming amount of information. I mean, like, I feel sometimes we are drowning in this, especially at the very, very beginning.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, how many times do you find yourself in a position where a student comes to you and say, what is blah, blah, blah sweep? And you're like, I have no freaking idea what you're talking about. Show me. Oh, yeah, that's a pendulum sweep.
Right,
oh, yeah,
right.
We talked about this for, decades now.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it happens, right? And I think there probably are lots of reasons, but we certainly, I feel like, do overcomplicate jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
I think, I don't know that it necessarily matters why we do it. And, you know, there are also, just like you just mentioned, cultural differences where one gym or one affiliation may name something one thing, and we call it something completely different at our gym, and having to map those things together.
Does that come from the fact of not having a one overseeing body of I don't know, management over jiu-jitsu and being very fluid? I mean, this doesn't happen in wrestling. This doesn't happen in judo. I mean, I'm not familiar with karate or taekwondo, but I don't believe that happens there either. There's a name and there's a name, and you like it or you don't like it. The question is, can you pronounce it? That's the question.
Right. Right. Yeah, I think, yeah, having a governing body, I think, would address some of that. But I also I think us making a more concerted effort as a community to keep working on simplifying things, I think will be helpful. You know, going back to the thing with the joint locks on the arm that I was just talking about. It's like hyperextending the elbow is hyperextending the elbow. Everything is just details and application. But, you know, we've got arm bars and choi bars and reverse arm locks and, blah, 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 when we're talking about the shoulder, Kimuras and omoplatas, and it's mechanically, we're doing the same thing.
The same thing.
It's,
Yeah, absolutely.
it's all the same. So I don't necessarily know that we need all of it, but we're kind of stuck with it at the moment. So we do our best.
Yeah, we definitely are stuck with it for more than one reason, especially as all of this is continues evolving, if you will.
Right.
And it's from this very short conversation, just 20 minutes or so, I can tell that there's a lot of passion behind this for you. It feels like that you really believe in all of this. Where this is all coming from?
So it's a good question. I kind of consider myself an educator, probably even more so than a jiu-jitsu practitioner. So, coming to the game, I was already coming to it with eyes of how am I going to teach this stuff, right? Because I was an instructor before I started jiu-jitsu. And coming to this world already an instructor, it looked like total chaos to me. And I'm like, this.
Well, it is a chaos.
It is, right? Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
But I'm like, I can't teach like this. This is not the way my brain thinks. Surely there's got to be some kind of unifying principles of jiu-jitsu, and ways that we can talk about it more broadly, more conceptually. And it took a long time to kind of find that community. Luckily, I've gotten plugged into some of it. But certainly my passion for being able to transfer knowledge to my students in a way that's accessible is kind of paramount over just about everything else. And whether it be we've got a bunch of meatheads at the gym that we were talking about earlier, or things are too complicated. In this imaginary jiu-jitsu brochure where we talk about jiu-jitsu being for everybody, jiu-jitsu is not for everybody. The way that,
no kidding.
The way that most
speaking the truth.
Yeah. The way that a lot of us approach it now, it's not for everybody.
No.
You start naming 15 different armbar variations to the new guy, you're probably not going to see that guy back unless he's just a particular kind of glutton for punishment. But it's going to, you're going to walk a lot of people in the front door and walk them right out the back door because of some of the issues that we have in the community.
Why do you think that phrase is so powerful these days? Jiu-Jitsu is for everybody, even though, at least both of us agree that it's not necessarily true.
Yeah, I think that
marketing gimmick.
Yeah, well, for sure. I think marketing is a huge part of it, and I also think that some of us may have kind of a weird definition of everybody, right? But I took it at face value. I took jiu-jitsu is for everybody at face value. And said, I don't think we're there yet, but I think jiu-jitsu can be for just about everybody if we approach it correctly and we treat it correctly and we teach it correctly.
Do you actually believe that everybody in this world could have an opportunity to actually learn this? Not try it, but learn this.
I think that there's a spectrum. Right. And I think that's true for the people that are in the sport now. Right. Do I think that everybody could get better at grappling? Absolutely. For sure. But a lot of that is, can we help this person reach their potential? And that's different than saying, can we get this guy looking like Joseph Chen in 6 years or, whatever it is. Right.
Right.
But if we look at this and say, based on the attributes that I have in front of me, can I teach this guy or gal to be a better grappler? Yeah, I think for the most part, we can do that with everybody.
Is this where your TED Talk came in a very strong and heavy way for you, where you say that, listen, self-defense is for those who need it the most, essentially?
Yeah, and that whole idea kind of came from, so my original background was in Krav Maga. And so I had a lot of interest in self-defense, and it took me a little while kind of stepping away from it. But you notice when you start walking into a lot of those places, the people that are attending the classes, like nobody's ever going to pick a fight with those dudes. Like they're huge and they're mean looking, and I'm looking around. I'm like, we're supposed to be teaching everybody to defend themselves, but we're just play fighting with dudes that are already monsters. We're making tough guys tougher, and that, in my opinion, goes against everything that we promised jiu-jitsu to be. It goes against everything we promised Krav Maga to be. So it's been my mission for a very long time to try to do my best to live up to that promise.
So let's rewind this a little bit. Let's go back a decade or two or three or five. I don't want to put a number on your age.
I am 47, by the way.
So am I. Yeah. There you go. But we all have this unique moment in which, we step on jiu-jitsu mats for the very first time. And I would imagine for you, that's a different than for most, because you do have experience in martial arts in the past.
Yeah.
Right. And now you're a black belt under Chris Haueter and all and we'll get into that because Chris is a unique guy. We had him on the show. I love Chris. I had him here at the academy too. What a unique experience. But anyhow, but when and how did this all start? One of the questions I ask almost every guest is, do you remember your very first day on jiu-jitsu mats?
I remember my first day. Yeah, I don't know that I really had a first day.
Okay.
So my first exposure to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was in the context of, I think I was at some sort of camp or instructor certification, and it was essentially using Jiu-Jitsu to enhance your Krav Maga skills, your self-defense skills.
Yeah, where are we talking about? Just from a perspective of evolution of this whole thing.
2007, I guess.
Okay.
I think it was around that time.
Okay. So nearly 2 decades ago. Okay.
Yeah. And I remember, number one, having a blast doing it, but it was a very much a kind of a practical seminar. If you're in, someone's got you mounted, blah, 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 blah. So I didn't have the crazy warm-ups. I didn't have the rolling at the end. I did not have that stereotypical template of a jiu-jitsu class.
So this is more of a applicable seminar or applicable skill seminar in a sense. You educating yourself on specific self-defense positions,
scenarios and positions. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's
okay.
Right.
Okay. So paint the picture here. Before that event, do you know what jiu-jitsu is? Do you have a clue? Like obviously you're heavily involved in Krav Maga.
Yeah.
So that's your world.
Yeah.
That's where you come from.
Yeah.
You're exposed to this jiu-jitsu grappling thing. Do you have an idea what you're walking into? Are you expecting anything? Is there? Where's your mind on all this?
Yeah. So I was fortunate enough to end up on a path in the Krav Maga world where we trained and were instructed. I would probably liken it most to kind of MMA training. So we were essentially training MMA, but with a prioritization towards thinking about self-defense and so we weren't just kind of practicing moves on a dummy and some of the other kind of weird things that a lot of the Krav Maga community will do at times. But so I did have a sense. I had already been spending a lot of time, working neck wrestling and stand-up grappling, and so I knew the underhooks and the overhooks and that sort of thing. I just hadn't spent a ton of time on the ground, but I knew what I was essentially getting into. Now, what was my awareness of it? The people that I looked up to as my mentors trained jiu-jitsu and thought a lot about jiu-jitsu. So that kind of carried over, and I'm like, well, these guys, I respect these guys. These guys know what they're talking about. I should expose myself to it. So that was, a lot of time there's this kind of contentious, oh, I'm a Krav Maga guy and you Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, whatever, all that nonsense. I didn't really go through that because, my coaches at the time were like, we're training Muay Thai, we're boxing, we're wrestling, Jiu-Jitsu, we're just getting good at fighting. And then we'll talk about what that means out in the parking lot versus being in a ring as we go. And it's like, perfect. That works for me. So going in, I already had some sense of what was happening. Now, I didn't actually make it into gi until 2 years later. And yeah, virtually all of my training up until, 7 years ago, 8 years ago was primarily no gi.
So what is your perspective on jiu-jitsu at that point? You mentioning some of the people you look up to, they do jiu-jitsu, but you haven't dipped into it yet.
Yeah.
It seems like a general awareness is pretty present, yet you're not doing it. So what's your perspective at that time about this pajama thing, or maybe forget about pajama, just grappling in general? How come Krav Maga is so much more priority in your life?
Yeah.
Versus dipping into jiu-jitsu, versus what we look at it today, it seems like that shifted the opposite direction, right?
Yeah. So, I think there were a few things. I think that I was very centrally focused at that time. So anything that I needed to train in service of progress in the Krav Maga system, I was very open to. But I didn't want to stray too far, just from the standpoint of I didn't want, and I probably have a different view on this now, but I didn't want things to get confused, or I didn't want to get my focus too spread out. And I did. I knew pretty early on into my exposure with jiu-jitsu, it's like, as soon as I get my Krav Maga black belt, if that ever happens, jiu-jitsu's next. So I did have a plan. I'm like, I really like this stuff, but I need to put it on the shelf. And I say put it on the shelf. I was still training, but my focus was in finishing, getting my Krav Maga black belt.
So you go to that event. 2 years later, you dip into the gi.
Yeah.
How is your life changing from that point on?
So I lived in Atlanta at the time. I was running a school at the time, and there was a pretty severe illness in there in between that we can get into or not. But while I was running the school, I did not have a in-town coach or mentor to interact with. A lot of this was like, I just had to work hard on my own. I've got to, not figure some of this stuff out, but I had to put the hours in myself. I had to put the work in myself. And then about once or twice a month ish, I would travel to Charlotte where my coaches were and train. And, early on, it was mostly like, I'm just going to go to the Krav Maga classes and, do my thing there. But they had jiu-jitsu programs and everything else going on there too. And pretty soon, I'd have guys, one of my coaches there, he'd be like, hey, we're going to meet up at 7 a.m. and ROL. Do you want to join us? And I'm like, I don't even know what the fuck that means, but
It sounds cool.
Yeah, sounds cool. Coach wants me there at 7. It's a special invite. I shouldn't say no. And holy moly, what a world to get dumped into at 7 a.m. But it was wonderful. And what ended up happening was every time I'd go to Charlotte, I would do some Krav Maga stuff, but most of the time I was just spending time in, whether it was just open mat rolling with the guys there or taking a jiu-jitsu class here and there. Because to me, even at that time, I was like, my stand-up, my striking, all that stuff's in pretty good shape. I really need to round myself. I need to round out my game, and I need to get better at this grappling stuff. And it was infectious. And what I didn't know then that I know now is that they were a pretty non-traditional group of guys too, in terms of, I didn't get in there the first day to ROL and they just beat the dog shit out of me. They were walking me through things during a ROL, and it was an incredibly supportive and instructive group. And I think that was the thing that made me fall in love. And I wanted to make sure that carried through.
Is there a point in which you switch directions, if you will? You shift over towards the grappling part?
Yeah. So I'm trying to think of years here. I got my Krav Maga black belt in how old's my son? 2015, 2016. No, it had to have been later than that. Anyway, somewhere around there, I did decide hey, I want to do this. I'm going to start focusing on this more. And even then I was, again, running my own school. So I didn't have, as you might know, I don't have a lot of free nights to just go to a whole different place and train jiu-jitsu.
Wait a minute.
Yeah.
Average jiu-jitsu instructor, all they do is surf when they can, eat acai, and teach 1 or 2 classes a day.
Right. That's it. That's all we do.
What do you mean you don't have time? I mean, this is very confusing to me.
Right. So eventually, I moved from Atlanta to Louisville. I opened another school up in Louisville, Kentucky, and I was trying to make sense of kind of what I wanted the path to be, but I knew that I wanted to start working and training jiu-jitsu. I was already training a lot and as much as I could, and but I wanted it to be a little bit more formal. So I finally found someone that would kind of mentor me from afar, and I would go visit, we would meet up, and I would get kind of promoted as time went on, but a lot of it ended up being kind of remote learning while I was running a school. And one of the things that I learned pretty early on, I guess, in the Krav Maga world is I would get better. I would become a better technician. I would become a better grappler, a better striker, a better whatever, when I was teaching the things that I was trying to execute. So even early on, when it was not perfect, and I was starting to teach some of this stuff, in a real kind of limited capacity, and that ended up being one of my main kind of training and learning vehicles, is finding things, trying to reproduce things, trying to teach things, trying to work them in live environments. So a lot of my jiu-jitsu, I've got that kind of weirdo background. A lot of the jiu-jitsu ended up being kind of self-taught. It was kind of an independent study.
Case for most of us, actually. I mean, I understand that people come to the academy and they learn, and we teach them, and there is this knowledge transfer, in a sense, from instructor or a coach to the student. But many refer to this mid portion of of the ranking, like a purple belt or a seasoned blue belt. And for some people, that comes a little bit heavier or a little bit later and towards the brown belt. But we all experience this self-taught environment where we say, I'm going to go to the class, but I'm actually going to experiment with something else, or this is on my mind. And our unintentionally, or maybe intentionally, our mind drifts away in a sense of we are exploring, we're experimenting, we are trying to self-learn in some sense, no?
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, it's one of the things that I tell my purple belts. When I put a purple belt on you, I am telling you that I think you are at a place of understanding how to learn jiu-jitsu, that most of the rest of your journey can be self-taught. And that most of the rest of your journey to black belt is probably going to be kind of an independent study. And that's not to say that they don't come in and they're taking classes and, we're working on, like I said earlier, even once I was a black belt at Krav Maga, I could still sit in a room for 45 minutes and just work the jab, right? Mm-hmm. We can still come in and work these fundamental skills, but maybe we're doing it through the lens of whatever it is that we're working on at the moment. And I think that's also true, maybe even earlier, blue belt. I can't do everything and I don't know everything in jiu-jitsu, if you can believe that.
But wait a minute, you're the instructor.
Yeah.
You should know everything, no?
No, I shouldn't. My job as an instructor is to be as much of a resource as I can, be as good a kind of purveyor to transfer the knowledge that I do have, but also, from day one, I'm helping people understand that there are other resources out there and to help people find other quality resources that fill in some of the gaps that I have. That is my job, in my opinion, as an instructor. The idea, the concept that I'm going to know everything or be good at everything is laughable. And I think students usually, students know when you're bullshitting, right? So I think it's important to be very upfront about where your limitations are, knowledge-wise, physicality-wise, and not let that be an impediment to their own journey, right?
So why so many instructors then put, maybe not by choice, but they are put on this pedestal in a sense where everybody looks up to them and what they say is the only way to go and is the only way to do it, and there is a wrong way if you don't do it this way. Like, this is, even though this is an old school mentality and many do say that, it's still very much so present today.
Yeah. And I think that strikes at the heart of why we have failed as a community for jiu-jitsu to be for everybody. There isn't just one way, right? And the thing that works for me may not work for you. But I think it's really difficult, especially for people that haven't been coaching for a terribly long time, to step out and say, hey, wait a second, maybe this is working for me because I've got X, Y, Z attribute. And this person in front of me doesn't have those same attributes. So whatever they're doing isn't going to work the same way. One of the funniest examples, we have a lot of women that train at the school, and we have a fairly significant number of very skinny women. And there have been times where when two super skinny people get together, when we were working on whatever we were working on, maybe it's an arm triangle, it was some sort of head and arm choke. They were both so skinny that they couldn't choke each other because there just wasn't enough meat there. Yeah. Right? That doesn't mean that the technique sucks. It just means that the technique, this one may not be your go-to. And it was really funny because, I could split those people up and be like, go try it to that big dude over there. And they immediately can finish the choke. just because there's more mass that they can stuff into that loop. Not everything's going to work for everybody, and not everything's going to work for everybody the same way. Now, that's not to say that there aren't wrong ways, right? There's lots of right ways to do a thing. There's probably even more wrong ways to do a thing. So we do have to be careful and still shepherd that and let them understand why things do or don't work in a particular way. But I think, one of my earliest coaches, when he knew that I wanted to teach jiu-jitsu, he says, you have two main jobs. Your first job is to help people fall in love with jiu-jitsu. Your second job is to help them find their jiu-jitsu. Right? And that's a different thing than most of us think about. I don't want people to copy and paste me and the way I do things in my jiu-jitsu. That I'm not interested in that at all. In fact, I am constantly having to force people to do different things because it ends up being kind of a monoculture because people start behaving in similar ways that I do. And I'm like, no, I want you to try it this other way. Try to find some different paths to this thing.
So how should we navigate through all of this as students, where we, one, are not supposed to mimic the instructor in a sense of copying them. At the same time, we need to dissect the information they are sharing with us and make our own. But how am I supposed to make my own if I'm not copying you? It's almost like what came first, chicken or an egg, in a sense.
Yeah. I think it's tough. That I think when you are in an environment where you have a coach telling you have to put your hand there and that is the only way it's going to work, it's tough. There's not a lot of margin for creativity there, right? And the thing that I tell my students, when up against people like that, if they're out visiting or watching an instructional or whatever, I'm like, watch how they do it in the instructional and then go watch how they do it in competition or go watch how they do it in a ROL. And you will find that they're probably not even doing it the way they teach it. And I think that's real eye-opening to people. Oh, wait a second. They're not even doing it the way they said it has to be done. And I don't know that. I think coaching in jiu-jitsu, we are delayed. We're still a very young sport, and we're getting better. But a lot of jiu-jitsu coaching is just mimicking and aping the way that my coach taught. I'm going to teach that way, and they don't leave a lot of wiggle room. The same way that they don't leave a lot of wiggle room for the technique itself. So they're just telling you the exact same thing that their coach told them. And they may not even be aware that they do it differently in a live environment.
Do you think that some of that comes from the simple fact that we are trying to teach the students to learn jiu-jitsu versus educating ourselves how to be a better instructor?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think...
like there is instructionals everywhere how to do jiu-jitsu from everybody. I mean, free, paid, subscription, slice it however you want. I can't care less. There's literally millions of them out there.
Right.
But there's probably literally handful instructionals how to be a good instructor, how to teach.
Yeah. Well, I think part of that is because we are still working towards optimal ways of teaching. Right. We've got the whole kind of eco movement in right now. And so the pendulum's kind of, in at least some part of the jiu-jitsu community, the pendulum swinging way far over to that methodology. And some people are now being very resistant to that and keeping with their methodology. So I think there's some protectionism there that is kind of stifling growth. But I also think that it's really easy to get complacent as a coach. And, everybody, I didn't lose too many members this month. You know, I was able to make enough money to pay rent and pay my mortgage. And there may not be that internal motivation there to get better and to be a better coach. And finding time to do it is tough. I mean, you know, it takes time sitting down and watching and listening to other thinkers. It sometimes requires, and I will tell you, it happens a lot on my floors. It requires a ton of experimentation on my part, right? And, you know, and I'll tell them, I'm like, I've got this new idea. I want to see if it works. If not, we'll make some adjustments to it and move on. And nobody ever minds, right? They know that I'm working on some things, and hopefully the outcome is going to be better for them. So everybody's, I never get any pushback on that.
I mean, look, you look at basketball or hockey or whatever, any other sport, and the coach underperforms, he gets fired. I mean, that's how simple it is. Now, granted, you might not get fired from your own business, but somebody should say something. Hey, listen, like you standing in front of a class of 50, like maybe you need to speak clearer, like, or maybe, you know, a certain approach here would bring more benefit, or maybe let's look at this, let's improve on some things. Why do we take this so casually? Yeah. And like, I almost feel like there's this assumption, the moment you get a purple belt, you automatically should be teaching. A brown belt is like, you better start teaching. And black belt is like, what the hell you not teaching?
Right.
And nobody's looking at this as, how do we teach them to teach? Mm-hmm. How do we get them to be better teachers? Because, correct me if I'm wrong, but if every instructor would be phenomenal teacher, we would have more people doing jiu-jitsu. No?
Without a doubt. And it's something I take very seriously at my school. If people have a desire, right? I don't ever push anybody into it, but if people have a desire, I start helping them develop as a coach at blue belt. You know, I've got a blue belt that teaches my 6 o'clock class on Tuesday nights, and he's got the biggest class of the week. Coaching development is incredibly important to me, and I feel like it's something we don't take terribly seriously. Number one, there aren't great resources out there still, but I also don't necessarily think that we have the checks and balances in place that we might in basketball or football or hockey, in that there could be 85, 90, maybe even higher % of your student body that doesn't compete, right? So you and your coaching aren't necessarily getting tested and displayed on the public stage in a way that even like a little league baseball coach might, right? He's having to coach a game every week out in public where people can see. Jiu-jitsu schools, especially historically, are kind of closed ecosystems, except for, you know, a handful of people that will go out every month or so and do a competition. And a lot of the bad coaching gets covered up by the fact that there are people in there, and it's the people that are competitors and successful competitors that are just going in there and getting it done through brute force. I'm just going to spend 8 hours a day in this gym, and I'm going to roll with everybody, and everything's going to be super intense. And so, you know, this brute force method of learning jiu-jitsu, and then they go out and they win gold, and the coach is like, look at what a good coach I am. So a lot of times the success, in my opinion, ends up being in spite of bad coaching and not because of good coaching.
Shouldn't we grow as humans in a sense of having a responsibility of, if I am a coach, if I am an instructor, I should actually try to be better? Like, I should try to improve. I want to provide the best for my students. Are we really that blinded in some of those areas where we say, I'm good at doing jiu-jitsu, so I must be good at teaching it.
Right. Well, and especially when you extrapolate that one step further and be like, I'm good at jiu-jitsu, so whatever my coach must have been doing must be the right way.
Right.
And so if I
Right.
just
So
copy him, I'll be a good coach.
Yeah.
And it's just not true. But and there's probably a lot of reasons for it. I feel like there are, I don't know if it's most, I don't know if it's some, but there's a contingent of people that feel done when they get their black belt. I'm done. I am a fully cooked jiu-jitsu practitioner. I'm a fully cooked coach, whatever it may be. So this idea of, hey, I need to continue developing as a human, as a coach, as a grappler, doesn't necessarily occur to them because they got this cool black belt that tells them that they're done, they're finished, they're at the pinnacle.
Well, I often say that there's 2 points in the journey where people quit the most. One is the blue belt, and everybody talks about that. But I think the second one, where nobody talks about it, or not many people talk about, is the black belt.
Yeah.
I think if you compare the numbers of percentage-wise, how many people quit at black belt, we would be mind blown.
Yeah.
I mean, like it is almost that. And I'm curious what you think about this. I feel like if we make it to that purple, we're gonna make it to that black.
Yes.
Like
yeah.
it's almost like the percentages are really, really high.
Yeah.
But also that means that the moment we get that black, it just dips off.
Right.
It just dips off. It's significant loss.
Yeah.
Like, what's wrong with us? Why would that be the end of it? And those who stick around oftentimes talk about it, like you get your black belt and you're almost starting over. You have to reevaluate everything, and you look at it from different perspective. You have different vision of it. You go through this change, but yet so many depart.
Well, and even if they don't physically depart, I think they kind of emotionally and mentally kind of depart, right? Once you get that belt, you're done. And they have that because they've worked so hard, right? That grind to get that black belt. Then once you're up at the top of that hill, you don't realize that there's a whole other mountain behind it. And I think that it's the same reason that blue belts quit, right? Would you remember that slog from, spending however much time you spent in white belt, and you're like, God, if I could just get that blue belt, and then they get that blue belt and they feel like they've accomplished and they've met this goal. And so they have this feeling of being done, and it's hard to stay energized, especially when they are looking down the barrel of, oh my God, I got to do that all over again to get my purple belt, and then all over again to get my brown belt. I think it's true in a lot of areas of life, but I'm not a terribly big fan of goal setting. I'm a big fan of direction setting, right? I want to get better at jiu-jitsu. I'm going to roughly point myself in the direction of getting a black belt, but until there's a good reason not to continue going down that path, I'm going to keep going that direction and keep making progress, even if I hit certain milestones. But when you think about a goal being this end state, it's real easy to get in that trap of being done. Yeah.
I mean, technically, you are done. You have achieved the goal, right? Like the big question is why we are not going past that point. Right.
Well, yeah. I mean, we've achieved enough for another black belt to decide that we are worthy of a black belt, but that doesn't necessarily tell you anything about your journey as a grappler. If you are really in this to be a better grappler, and understand what that goal or that direction really is. There is no end. There is no finished. And to me, I think that's one of the things that's so exciting about jiu-jitsu is it doesn't ever have to be over. It can be an infinite hobby, right? You never have to stop learning. But when people get in that mentality and that mindset of, I've got to get to this milestone and this milestone and this milestone, it's really easy to drop off.
So it's almost like we are victims of our own success in a sense.
Without a doubt, yeah.
But this ranking system was oftentimes developed as a retention tool, as a reward tool for the hard work, and then now this is backfiring. In a sense, we have achieved it. Whereas there's nothing else to do. You know, it's very interesting how all this evolves, and it goes in circles, doesn't it?
It does, and and I think that we are a victim of our own success. I think that because so much of jiu-jitsu up to the last decade or so has been about, speaking of Chris Haueter, right? It's not who's good, it's who's left, right? We have this survivorship.
Yeah.
We have this survivorship bias in jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
And I think that there is no reason why. I think the last time I looked at Belt Checker, they have some statistics on beltchecker.com. And I think most of the black belts there, the average time it took to get to black belt is 12 and a half years, 12 years, 7 months, something like that. I don't think it should take that long. I think the reason it takes that long is because we've overcomplicated jiu-jitsu and we have a lot of shitty coaching practices. Now, I still think it should take a long time, right? I still think that there should be a process, but this idea, and I've heard coaches talking about, people quitting after they get their blue belt, or their, to me that is or how many white belts quit after the first 6 months or whatever it is. To me, that is a failure. That is a failure as a coach. It's a failure as a business owner. You are doing it wrong. If only 5% of the people that started with you, or even less, 1%, ever get to black belt. And that's not to say that jiu-jitsu is not challenging. It should be. It is. But I think we're making it way harder than it needs to be. Because, well, that's what I went through. That's what I'm going to put everybody else through, right? It's this hazing mentality. If I went through it, you got to go through it. And I think we really need to break away from that.
So what would be your advice?
I don't necessarily have a number. I do think that one of the great things about jiu-jitsu and the ranking is its subjectivity. For the most part, I know that there's some people that, or some affiliations that have very strict, you have to be able to perform these 37 moves and to get your whatever. But I love the subjectivity of it. And so that it shouldn't, as soon as you sign up on day one, you're going to know if you stick with it, you're going to get a black belt in 9 years. I don't love that, right? That's certainly not what I'm advocating for. But at the same time, I think that as coaches and as business owners, we should want people to get as good as they can, as fast as they can, right? Because I feel like that starts to bring more enjoyment to the sport. You get on Reddit, you get on YouTube, you get on wherever, and there's people boo-hooing all the time about, God, I've plateaued, and I got done with class today, and I just sat in the parking lot and cried in my car, and like that's crazy to me that's a thing that ever happens. And to me, that is a failure of helping your students learn how to appropriately set goals. It is a failure to appropriately and transfer knowledge and help them through the skill acquisition process. And again, it's not something that should happen in 3 years, but I don't think it's something that we should ever brag about. Like, oh, I make sure that it takes 6 years to get purple belt at my school. It's like, why? Well, they have to blah, blah, blah. It's like, it seems really silly to me. It's unfortunate.
There's a lot of complexity behind this.
Yes.
A lot of layers. And I think what we talked about just a bit ago during this conversation is the fact that we are very siloed to the environment we are in, to the academy we are in, creates these independent environments almost.
Yeah.
And that gives us the power to create our own environment. At the same time, it creates this differentiators between different places and how things are done at different academies and how different instructors do them. And hate it or love it, but this is where we are today. And I don't think that's changing anytime soon, honestly.
No,
truthfully, unless there is one overseeing body of all of this, I don't think this is changing ever. And in the direction that this is going, I'm not foreseeing having a IBJJF or any other organization for that matter really folding everybody under and overseeing it to the point where it's so controlled.
No, I absolutely agree with you. But I do think that it gives coaches, school owners, I think it gives us an opportunity. Just, you used a great word of differentiation, right? At my school, we do things, a certain way that is going to be a good fit for some people and not be a great fit for others. And, as saturated as the jiu-jitsu market may have become by now, I think having those differentiators attracts a certain type of student and can kind of repel others, which I think is good. I think that's the way it should be. I don't think we should all be, and it goes back to the subjectivity, right? I don't think we should all be cookie cutters of one another and copy and paste and being able to differentiate yourself based on the fact of, hey, we get people better faster using this methodology that kind of we've developed in-house, is a huge competitive advantage in my eyes. As a business owner, I hope nobody else follows along, because that's going to put me ahead. But as a coach who's interested in everybody's jiu-jitsu, it's a bummer. It's a bummer.
Yeah. It's a tricky waters to navigate
for sure
through as we, especially as a business owner, as an instructor. So we wear many different hats, and we're trying to really navigate through this somewhat chaos.
Oh, without a doubt.
And make it while making impact on other people and while helping other people, right?
Yeah.
This is, I think, what's often not talked about and not seen, what instructors have to deal with it and how they have to navigate through these things.
Yeah.
Jess, we've been at this for well over an hour.
Wow, look at the time.
I know, right? What a great chat. But as we coming to the end of all of this, what I do at the end of every episode, I have a question for you from a previous guest.
Okay.
And this is interesting. This is funny. Hopefully it's not so serious, at least the way I'm reading it. But the question is, what is your BJJ favorite moment throughout your journey? Is there one moment that sticks out more than any other one, and you keep going back and you say, yeah, that one. Yeah, that was a cool day.
Wow. A favorite BJJ moment. I mean, I feel like it's I wish I could answer this question in 15 more years, right? We got this primacy and recency effect. I was actually fortunate enough, although I'm under him now, I did not get my black belt from Chris. And I was with my previous coach, the gentleman that did give me a black belt. I was able to go to Rio and receive my black belt there. And that day was, or at least that moment, right, of receiving and this representation of hard work was incredible. So I think as a practitioner, that would be one answer. As a coach, though, and it's not a moment, but I do have a certain student who, when they first came in, I'm like, oh, this person's not going to last. They're not going to last. And they are one of the most consistent, one of the most helpful, one of the most talented students that I have. And, being able to get to see him and be like, man, what you have been able to do with your attributes and some of your limitations is really humbling. And so I would say that person in that situation is probably the thing that warms me up the most, for sure.
Those moments almost melt us, don't they?
Yes, absolutely, they do.
Yeah. Yeah, that journey is so rich. I feel like we really have to take it day by day, and thanks to conversations like this, it really, I think, exposes others to, some of these beautiful things that this art, this sport, this activity really brings to the community. And I'm pretty confident that those who are listening to this episode, it's going to change their perspective, how they look at these things.
Well, good.
Just if anybody wants to take a look at this or connect with you or just revisit this whole thing and see who you are or connect with you directly with any questions, are you available on social media? Are you available? Where are the websites? Where can you be found? How does this work for you?
Yeah. So our school website is roughhandsbjj.com, and that is also our handle on all social media, Instagram, Facebook. We're kind of all over everywhere. So you can connect with me directly, Jesse Walker. I'm always happy to interact with folks, or if they want to interact kind of through the facade of the school. I love talking jiu-jitsu. I love connecting with people. So yeah, I welcome all of that.
We'll include, as always, we'll include all the links in the show notes of this episode. So if you guys want to connect with Jesse, feel free to do it. We're a brilliant mind, and make sure you check out his TED Talk, because I think that's a fascinating one. I love seeing that, where instructors reach outside of the bubble of jiu-jitsu to really expose and create their own passion and create that separate path of sharing that passion with a lot of others. And you have definitely done that. So
thanks. I appreciate that.
I appreciate you being here. I appreciate you sharing your story, being vulnerable, and just chatting with me.
Yeah, great talk. This was fun.
And we didn't really talk much trash about bastard jiu-jitsu. I mean, like, if that kind of slipped in, like, I gotta contact him and tell him he got lucky on that.
I know.
We got to do a special episode.
Yeah, we may have to do a special episode because he really dodged the bullet.
All right, Jesse. Thanks for hanging out with me today.
Thank you.
What a great conversation. And as always, I'll be sitting on the sidelines and watching how you continue doing the amazing things in the community of jiu-jitsu.
Thank you for listening to ROL Radio. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to leave us a review and help us make the show even more amazing. For future episodes, check out our website and follow us on all major podcast platforms. Take care.